to be the MC for what is the second New York Times debate at the SIA Youth and Leaders Summit. So in effect, I'm going to be your autocrat for the evening, the rule maker, rule giver. As a partner and enthusiastic supporter of the YNL Summit since its inception, we at the New York Times are really delighted to bring our debate format here to conclude today's proceedings. The New York Times debate series is intended to create space for balanced, nuanced and respectful argumentation where we can disagree well. So those words, respectful, disagreeing well, are really the operative words that I want you to think about this evening. These are attributes that are in short supply in our increasingly polarized world, where inflammatory and entrenched opinions tend to eclipse other perspectives, where it's as important, if not more important, to listen deeply and appreciate where points of view that differ from our own are coming from, and to recognize that often compromise is the foundation of progress. We hosted a debate last week in Davos on the day that President Trump gave his speech, a speech that kept our fact checkers at the New York Times very busy, and the day after Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney set out a vision for the post-rules based order. Our debate was a raucous affair. It was a heady cocktail of theater and substance being critical. And I expect you guys to raise to the challenge that we set in Davos. So that's the challenge to you. So ladies and gentlemen, our motion this evening is guns or butter. Which should come first, security or human development? Our brave debaters on each side of the motion will be introduced shortly by student presenters who will also read out an opening statement to help set the scene. But it's up to our intrepid debaters to make the case for and against our motion, and it will be up to you, the audience, to decide using the highly sophisticated New York Times clapometer technology, which is essentially me, your autocrat for the evening, deciding which side of the motion receives the loudest applause after all the arguments have been made. Please remember, part of the ethos of this debate is that our debaters are not necessarily speaking from a place of personal opinion. They are being assessed on their intellectual performance and ability to persuade, and may very well be arguing against their own personal conviction. So please bear that in mind. And our wonderful audience, do lean into the theatrics of this moment and encourage the debaters as much as you can by clapping and cheering and generally being as noisy as possible when they make a good point. If you think they make a bad point, you can also indicate that, your displeasure. Actually, why don't we have a little warm-up session to get into the swing of things. For those of you who think constructive, respectful debate is essential for a functioning democracy, please clap now. It's okay. I'll give you a 6 on that. It's a good starting point. Okay, listen up, everybody. Let me explain the rules. The first debater from each side of the motion will come up and stand at their respective podiums. Guns, butter. The team from the for team will speak first, followed by the against team, and then we will alternate that for the next time. The for team debater will remain at the podium whilst the against team debater makes their case. Then the second debaters for each side of the motion will come up to their respective podiums and again both remain at the podiums to make their case and to listen to the counter arguments. The whole point of the two debaters standing here is also that to show respect and to listen. Each speaker has 5 minutes to make their case. Debaters, a warning, we will be vigilant with the time, so please watch the clock as you will be cut off, that's me cutting you off, after 5 minutes have expired. Actually, where is the clock going to be? Do we have somebody do the timer? So somebody's going to be there. You're going to have 2 computers, okay, so that's where the clocks will be, so keep an eye on them. Now, once all of our debaters have presented their arguments, you, members of our audience, will be invited to provide feedback on what you have heard from one team or the other. I repeat, you can give feedback from what you've heard to one team or the other. We're going to allocate 10 minutes to get your feedback. Importantly, the feedback should be constructive in nature with a view of guiding the team about what additional points could help them make a more convincing case. Your advice should be focused on helping the teams in their final rebuttals. What we don't expect is for you to make 5-minute statements. So please make your comments, your advice, your counsel as pithy and short as possible. We are not asking you to pass judgment on what you've heard, but instead you are encouraged to present the debaters with challenges and highlight their blind spots. Your points must engage directly with the arguments presented, not contest the general position. So I hope that's all clear. If any of you attempted to make long statements, again, I have the privilege of being the autocrat for the evening, so I will shout at you. For clarity, you should only give feedback, again, I'm making this point, you should only give feedback members of the audience for one team, not both. So after some of you, because I don't think we're going to have time for all of you, have imparted your wisdom, we'll have a very short break of 3 minutes to give the teams both some time to digest your feedback, prepare their final retorts, and nominate someone from their team to present the final rebuttal. Their nominee will have up to 5 minutes for their final rebuttal, and then we will go to the vote. I hope that's all clear. I'm going to say one more thing on this, though. It's important when you pick your side, try to suspend your own bias and consider which side made a better case, injected the most passion and the arts of persuasion to sway you. Okay, that's it. But before we get cracking, I now invite Chengzi Zhu, who is studying governance and diplomacy, to introduce the debaters for the guns side of the motion and to deliver his prepared statement. Welcome to the stage. Give him a round of applause.
Hello, hello. It's very nice to see a lot of familiar faces here in the audience, and it is my pleasure to be with you here, all here today. I won't bore you too much with the facts and figures, because the reality of the situation is one we know too well. So let me begin by asking you this. How do we keep schools open when teachers are targeted by armed groups? How do we sustain trade when ports are blocked? How do development policies function when the very socio-economic infrastructures that sustain them are deliberately destroyed? Let me be clear. This is not an argument against development. But we must recognize that unresolved conflicts do not merely crowd out development. It destroys it in its entirety. This is not a hypothetical dilemma, but the reality of a major humanitarian crisis happening right now today. The examples of Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan. They are just a few examples of international humanitarian failures, where we saw billions in aid reduced to nothingness within a span of a few months, sometimes weeks. When their security fell, development is no more. I believe that this is a central point to our case, as this debate is not solely about values, but about sequence. Human development can be the goal, but security is the precondition. You simply cannot build schools before the ground is safe to play, and you simply cannot empower communities when armed groups control the streets. You simply cannot deliver aid when the state no longer exists. This is not the exception, but the unwritten rule. We are living through a structural shift in what many call the collapse of the rule-based order. The playbook that once ensured stability is no longer respected by those with expansionist ambitions. Whilst in an ideal world, to quote John Lennon, the world will be as one. The lack of security will leave the world in pieces. This is not a possibility. It is simply inevitable. This year at the World Economic Forum, a familiar idea emerges, the idea of a rupture, shifting paradigms from the old to the new. The importance of creating renewed alliances was key to address this rupture. This is a pattern we all know too well, to take up arms with allies or be armed against. In this world, security takes precedence, to protect our citizens and our people. Now, global military spending has recently reached approximately $2.7 trillion, its steepest rise in decades, with projections suggesting that it could well double by 2035. Clearly, the world is in anticipation. And indeed, some may argue that this increased military spending risks war. I believe that this is true. This risk sure does exist, which is precisely why security investment must be proportional and anchored in collective frameworks, such as NATO, not one of egoistic unilateralism. But let us be honest about the alternative, because without collective security, we're vulnerable. History shows us that wars do not begin when states are strong. They begin when aggressors believe that states are weak. Deterrence, thus, is not about domination, but about preventing escalation to the point of no return. Underinvestment in deterrence feeds into the danger of war when an emerging power challenges a ruling power, and this was proven by a concept called the Thucydides trap. Air defense systems keep hospitals functioning, and naval patrols keep food from moving. Coast guards keep humanitarian corridors open. These are not militaristic abstractions. They are tools which ensure civilian protection, grounded in reality which advance in parallel to the values of human development. Now, from this, I'd like to show you that the prioritization of security is not one of choice, but one of necessity. The absence and negligence of security leads the bullies of the international order to infringe on state sovereignty and attacks on the most vulnerable within our international community. Undoubtedly, we live in a world where muscles have to be flexed to deter ill actors. And to flex those muscles, we have to have them first. Now, this brings us back to the core of today's debate. The question is not whether human development matters. It certainly does. The question is how we respond when the violence threatens the very possibility of development. And our position is simple. Where violence undermines the basic functioning of society, security is not a competitor of development, it is an empowerer. And without it, schools cannot teach, markets cannot operate, and institutions simply cannot endure. Development sure improves lives. Security prevents it from the destruction. So I believe the real choice before us is not guns or butter. It is whether butter can exist at all in a world without order. Thank you. And sorry, now turning to our speakers. On our team, we have arguing for security. We are joined by Oana Lucenscu. Thank you. Former spokesman of NATO and now distinguished fellow at the Royal United Service Institute, a security and defense think tank based in London. And Alberto Alemanno, Jean Genet, professor of European Union Law and Policy at HEC Paris, and democracy fellow at the Harvard University. Thank you. I believe I will yield the floor to Paolo.
Zhengzi, thank you. Give him a big round of applause. And indeed, Paolo, please come up.
Good evening. Thank you, Cheng. Picking up on what my colleague just said, it's true. We undeniably live in a world that's far more insecure, not just in terms of state defenses, but in the safety of millions of individuals. In just 5 years, overlapping wars, humanitarian crises, and climate shocks have claimed an estimated 2 million lives. From Gaza and Ukraine to Sudan and Ethiopia, human catastrophes are exposing the limits of the international community in addressing them and preventing them. But danger lies not only in the catastrophes themselves, but in the illusions they create. That a world made of well-armed national egoisms that are diverting resources from human development to excessive defense programs could somehow be safer. That misconception is first an act of disloyalty towards history. When, at the half of the mid of the 20th century, the world's major powers came together to create a system of global cooperation, that was the first time in the history of the human race. When the UN Charter was signed in 1945, the UN Development Programme activated in 1965, or regional organizations such as the European Union were launched. Those projects were not accidents of history. In 1950, global life expectancy stood at around 42 to 45 years. Adult literacy was at 40%, and extreme poverty affected around half of the world's population. Now, until now, development programs, alongside economic growth, have produced unprecedented gains in history, raising life expectancy to over 72 years, increasing global literacy to nearly 90%, and reducing extreme poverty to under 10% worldwide. None of these achievements can be taken for granted, but the system, the architecture that was designed to advance them, is fading. Revisionist powers worldwide are withdrawing from multilateral institutions and ODA programs. It is no coincidence that after 30 years of steady improvement, the Human Development Index has stalled over the last 4 years. The United States, which until recently accounted for over 30% of global funding for development programs, has dismantled its USAID projects and announced its withdrawal from 66 multilateral organizations. In the meantime, the administration announced a new defense budget of $1.5 trillion. So what can we do? As Canada's Prime Minister Carney recently stated, nostalgia is not a strategy. If current frameworks collapse, alternative actors must acknowledge it and pick up the torch. Let me add a personal example I'm very attached to. Last October, I was in Kharkiv, Ukraine, with an Italian NGO to deliver power generators. Many partner associations there expressed a tragic concern over the cutting of USAID funding, as extreme weather conditions are often dealt with without electricity nor heating. In the midst of such a crisis, the European Union stepped in and increased its financial funding to the war-torn country. That's what middle powers must do, at a time when a paradox unfolds. Crises proliferate, yet the development projects that are designed to prevent them and mitigate them are being abandoned. Now, the current frameworks are certainly not perfect, but they are still the most pragmatic instrument to reduce long-term drivers of instability and create the conditions for just peace, before crises explode, while they unfold, and after they end. Let's be clear, this is not a call for appeasement towards expansionist countries, but a plea to understand that the majority of crises today simply cannot just be dealt with a gun. If you imagine a world without human development, that's the world, that's the history that gave us 2 world wars. The path forward to avoid such a dystopian scenario is clear. We must start investing massively where human development programs are the front line, such as the battle against poverty, the battle against extremism, the battle against climate change, and ultimately the battle against human suffering. To discuss this in more depth, let me present the speakers. Please welcome Ms. Kate Gilmore, chairperson at the International Planned Parenthood Federation and former UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, and Ms. Gabriela Ramos, Co-Chair Task Force Inequality and Social Financial Disclosure, former Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences, UNESCO. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well done. I think that this perfectly set, the stage is perfectly set by both of you, so really very well done. Thank you very much. Very clear, very lucid. Your role now, though, is to be timekeepers or to help make sure that our respective teams can see the clock. Can you see that? We all, yeah? Okay, so I'm going to invite both the first debaters from each side, Guns and Butter, to come up to the stage. And we're going to start the first round with Guns. And you have now, starting as a clock set, 5 minutes. Off you go.
Hello, young leaders. There's a question that people ask me these days wherever I go across Europe, and actually one of your colleagues asked more or less the same question this afternoon. And the question is, will we have war? And my answer is that NATO members are safe today, but to stay safe in the future, we must make some hard choices. Because we live in dangerous times, and both our adversaries and our allies only respect strength. Russia's war in Ukraine is the biggest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. Russia has put its economy on a war footing, spending 40% of its budget on war, producing thousands of attack drones every month, and thousands of cruise and ballistic missiles every year. Since the start of the war, 1 million Russians have been killed or wounded, yet President Putin's objectives have not changed: to control Ukraine, destroy NATO, and restore a sphere of influence. Putin is not preparing for peace, but for long-term confrontation. He couldn't wage his war without support from North Korea, Iran, and China, which has embarked on a massive military buildup of its own, including nuclear weapons. Moscow is also destabilizing societies across Europe, sabotaging railway lines and undersea cables, cyber attacks on parliaments, arson in shopping centers, explosives in DHL packages, drones over airports. The foundation of any society is peace and security, but peace has a price. During the Cold War, European countries spent around 4% of GDP on defense. Together with a US nuclear umbrella, that ensured that the Cold War did not get hot. The Soviet Union knew that the cost of any aggression would be much higher than the benefit, so it didn't even try. That's how deterrence works. As tensions went down, so did defense budgets. By 2014, the average was 1.5% of GDP, and that's when Russia annexed Crimea. The peace dividend, the money not spent on defense after the Cold War, is estimated at over 4 trillion euros. It enabled the EU to fund the most generous welfare system in the world, taking up around 1/3 of GDP. It also enabled Europe to become the world's largest provider of development aid. So Europe had lots of butter and some to spare, and hardly any guns. But how sustainable was that? For decades, Europe relied on cheap gas from Russia, cheap goods from China, and security guarantees from the United States. That model is gone, leaving European governments to face real dilemmas. 1 billion more for defense may mean 1 billion less for pensions or development. Yet, faced with Russia's aggression, China's challenge, and America's unpredictability, Europeans must reduce their vulnerabilities and become more self-reliant. That's why, since 2014, defense spending in Europe has started to go up again, and why last year, NATO leaders decided to reach 5% of GDP over the next decade. That's 3.5 on defense capabilities and 1.5 on resilience. Europeans support investing more in their national armies. In Germany, 75% are in favor, even if it leads to a growing deficit. Europe must invest more in its defense, not to provoke a war, but to prevent a war. It's an investment in peace. And yes, the price of peace is high. But if we fail to support Ukraine today and deter further aggression tomorrow, the price will be unimaginably higher, and it will be paid by young people like you. Countless families, homes, schools, hospitals, businesses. So peace and security come first, because without peace and security, we have nothing. And that is a future we do not want and we cannot afford. Thank you.
Perfect. Brilliantly timed. 5 seconds remaining on the clock. I just remind you, I think you landed some really important points. So I'm surprised you didn't get a little bit more applause. So I just urge you in the audience, just when a point is landed, let your debaters know, encourage them. Right. Are we set? Is the clock set? It is. Okay. Kate, you have 5 minutes.
Friends, everything is better with butter. Welfare, not warfare, is the recipe for inclusive security and sustainable prosperity. Butter nourishes prosperity, guns consumes it. Carbon emitting, civilian infrastructure imperiling, habitat ravaging, military spending enriches a tiny few, chomping away at essential services for the vast majority. Butter is a spreader. Since 2000, international butter has helped halve extreme poverty, saved more than 70 million children from death thanks to vaccinations, reduced AIDS-related deaths by 70%, no gun required. Moreover, if militarization is essential, why then its application so arbitrary? Okay for Ukraine, but not for Sudan or Myanmar or DRC. Military answers to a tough Russian question, yet military complicity in Israel's genocide of Palestinians. In an interdependent world, military strength for the security of some is effective security for none. History is a graveyard of states that chose guns first at cost of butter for people. And today, the will of we the peoples is for butter, not war. Guns are means, not ends. Butter is both. Higher social spending, lower gender and income inequalities means fewer conflicts, less violent crime, greater prosperity. Friends, in most countries, the most pressing security concerns for most have little to do with foreign troops at the border and everything to do with inequality, racialized and gender-based violence, with climate collapse, with violations, in other words, of our fundamental rights, not of national sovereignty. You want to talk security? Talk about whether a woman is safe in her own home, whether a young black man on the streets of Paris or London is safe from the police, whether anyone is safe from immigration authorities in Stockholm or Minneapolis. Threats quotidienne confronting millions for whom guns are more part of the problem than any form of solution. And yet the budget for militarization is hiked now to the equivalent of the GDP of the entire African continent, 13 times higher than for global development aid. Exactly what security is this militarization on steroids providing for those in the poorest countries for whom international aid was a lifeline? For the 239 million displaced persons who in 2026 will not have the humanitarian assistance they need because of guns. Security for whom? Warfare, I beg your pardon, over welfare. It's not a fight to protect what's right. It's a battle to guard the interests of might. It's overwhelmingly Western. It's laced with racism and misogyny. It's US-centric. It's plutocratic. It's brutalist in its scramble for diminishing natural resources and protection of asymmetric accumulation. And their betrayals of the Geneva Conventions and international human rights law now marketed as if the end of the rules-based order, as if a thief caught red-handed in their theft can declare an end to property law. Maybe Top Gun is high-grade entertainment, certainly beloved by its Pentagon sponsors and the Tom Cruise wannabes, but it's no-grade policy for the greatest threat to human security, which is a global economic system that has allowed 22 men to hoard more butter than all of Africa's women combined. Today's rampant militarization, it's not to protect us, it's to protect them.
Well done. Right on the button in terms of time. Okay, we're going to... our next speakers, would you want to the stage? We're going to set the clock again. You ready? 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
I know what many of you are thinking right now. We don't need more guns. This leads to warmongering. I understand this instinct. It's also mine. Certainly was when I was your age, and I lived in a very different world. And I hear Kate, I hear Paolo. But this is a kind of world where only few of us have this kind of experience, the experience of being threatened. Nearly everyone alive today has lived in a world dominated by one or two superpowers. That world was not peaceful, but it was predictable. And that predictability is kind of gone. And you know what, Kate? The militarization has already happened. It's happening right now. Russia invaded Ukraine, China threatens Taiwan, and the question is whether democracy are going to be able to defend themselves. Trump's administration wants a multipolar world of different spheres of influence, and crucially, China and Russia want the same. Each superpower dominating its neighborhood somehow. And Europe is a bit of a buffer zone. The global south is carved into zones of control. And this changes the calculus between guns and butter. And that's why all what you've heard so far doesn't apply. Because it applied in the past, but it doesn't apply today. And we are in this new world, even though we don't really like it. My argument is simple. Security is the prerequisite that makes development possible today and sustainable. Our opponents describe urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza, Sudan, and they are absolutely right about the suffering. But notice, every of those crises they have mentioned is somehow a security crisis first. My opponents want you to believe that defense spending undermines social welfare and well-being, but let's test that against reality. Welcome to Finland. Finland is the world's happiest country. Free university and universal health care, comprehensive welfare state. Also is a country that maintains mandatory military service and just double defense spending. Why? Well, over 1,000 kilometers border with Russia, and they continue spending 12 times more on social welfare than in defense. So they spend a bit in defense, but they spend much more in social welfare. Another example, South Korea, devastated in 1953, today universal healthcare, world-class education, 12th largest economy, and still faces existential threat 50 kilometers away from Seoul. And they spend 3% on defense, but they develop because of security investment, not despite it. True, you might say, some Nordic countries benefited from NATO collective security, and that proves my point. Sweden and Finland just joined NATO precisely because they understand that in this new world, even successful society, they need security guarantees, they need their guns. And that pattern, I think, is undeniable. You need guns to keep your butter. I know this audience cares about human rights, self-determination, international law. So do I. But that's why I'm making this argument. You cannot be for international law today and be against the means to enforce it, to make it relevant. Otherwise, we're going to be falling in love with a big idea. In this emerging new world, a multipolar world where great powers want spheres of influence, that truth is more urgent than ever, and we need to wake up, and not just wake up, we need to stand up and realize it. So let me reframe what this debate is really about. The question is not guns versus batter, it's which kind of world order we want to live in. This is the big question. It's a difficult one. Do we want to live in a multipolar world of spheres of influence where democracies exist at authoritarian pleasure, a bit like now, if you look at Europe from Paris, or a world where democracies have the capacity to defend their autonomy and choose their own path? No. I say no to the NATO Secretary General's statement of a few hours ago. I say no. Mark Rutte, this is not dreaming. This is the reality of today. And each country has to give itself the means to enforce the values it believes in. In that framing, security is the progressive position. Defending democratic space for human development against those who would eliminate that choice. And I close. The inconvenient truth is that
last point.
You need guns to protect your right to make, choose, and eat your butter. That's not militarism. That's how democracy looks like in today's world.
Thank you. Fantastic points. Thank you very much. Our final speaker. You have to
well, so glad to be here and so glad to come after Alberto. Because Alberto talked about framing. And we're framing as if we have a choice between guns or development. And guns will really contribute to security, and I think that's wrong. What really contributes to security is development. And just think about the mindset of people that decides to prioritize. We're not saying that we're just dumping security or we're just dumping the police or we're just dumping all the law enforcement, although they are very disqualified in some countries. The fact is that we really need to think, how do we frame these issues? Because where do we put the priority? That's a question. Budgets need to define priorities. And when your priority is investing in guns, the mindset gets into the low trust, into fear, into guns are made to be used. So let's just keep that in mind. And then when governments invest heavily in weapons, and we have seen it all through the history, they also invest in erecting walls. They also invest in trying to define me against them and try to build these cocoons where we can be protected instead of building bridges and try to reach out to those that are completely different from us. And development tells a very different story. Investing in education. And I'm glad that I'm here in Sciences Po. So investing in health, investing in social protection. This is the real human security. If you don't provide for education for our children, if you are fighting to get 5% of your budgets in defense, where this is going to come from, where more than 100 countries around the world have not reached education investment of 4%. They invest 3%. How are we going to build not only the capacity of people, but also the capacity to build with empathy, to try to find solutions, pacific solutions to conflicts? We don't mean to bring wars, we need to bring understanding And investing in education is the best means to build peace. And this is the most important point of these debates. How do we build peace? Through guns or through development? And let's just look around. Paulo made the points about history. Kate also made the point about history. I was your age when we were in the middle of the Cold War. Some of you might be in the same position. We were always so scared about somebody pushing the button. That's very unstable peace. I don't recommend it. I don't think that just building and building these arsenals gets into a self-fulfilling prophecy. And therefore, why would we put ourselves in that situation of needing to use the guns instead of investing in other elements? And then the other part is not that you have all of the resources and you can invest in everything. No, you need to make these choices. And therefore, when you neglect your population, when you neglect reducing the inequalities, when you neglect addressing poverty, when you neglect gender equality, shelters for women, etc., you create very polarized societies. And I'm going to expand a little bit on this argument, because where we are now, we are with populist leadership that are elected democratically, because many people feel that governments and investments have failed them. Therefore, I think investing in people might also be the safest way to consolidate our democracies. And my final point, let's not get distracted. Because the problem is, as soon as we get the scaremongering about, oh my God, we need to invest. And I understand where Europe is in terms of this very complex and disrupted moment we are living in. But we are then focusing on issues that are derailing our attention from the real security dangers that are climate change, that are inequalities, and that are poverty. Those are the real insecurity issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Big round of applause to both sets of speakers. We're now coming to you, audience. I need someone to help me with the time. We've got 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes. I can see 2 microphone stands here as well. I'm assuming they're going to be used for student speakers. So, who would like to kick off? And I remind you, if you have, I want you to choose a side. So thank you. So your side is who you're going to be addressing, guns or butter?
Both.
Rule breaker to kick us off. Supposed to be one of each, but this is an exception to begin with. So you know the rules of the game?
No.
You don't. The rules of the game, so you're giving advice to what you've heard, what you like and what you didn't like, in terms of giving our debaters counsel for when they come up to give the final rebuttals. So we want you to educate them and help them. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you for both your interventions. So it's more of a question. I heard you both talking about Europe, the United States. You mentioned Finland, South Korea. Those are great countries, great developed countries. I heard nobody talking about Africa. Nobody talked about Niger, Mali, Congo. Nobody talked about the Middle East. Nobody talked about Latin America. Nobody talked about Lebanon that is being attacked, but is also losing power many times a week. So they need both butter and they need security. So how do you see that? I mean, away from the West and the great powers that can afford it. The United States puts $1 trillion in security, but they can't afford it. And if they reduce, it's fine. Europeans are developed, so if they can invest more in security. What about countries that do not have the money and need both? Lebanon needs both, Africa needs both, Latin America needs both. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to this gentleman here.
Good evening. My name is George Ramirez. I'm also part of the Master of Global Affairs program at Rice University in Houston, Texas. I wish to advise the panel on guns, on why history is indicative of the necessity of collective security. The largest period, prolonged period without major wars in European history was the Concert of Europe. It was held up by a balance of power in which states with strong militaries in the post-Napoleonic world balanced against each other using their respective militaries. In times when a country such as Russia in the Crimean War sought to assert itself and mess with that balance of power, countries like France, Prussia, the United Kingdom stepped into the fold with their military and maintained that era of peace. In that way, history and state behavior requires guns so that states can defend their own interests and can defend what the peace that we take for granted.
Thank you. Madam.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to address the Butter group. So thank you so much for your arguments, and I completely agree with all of them. I just had a suggestion for a further point that could be made, given that the opposing group talked a lot about protecting democracy. Maybe it's important to remind how equality is essential for real democracy, because only with having certain capabilities and a certain equality, people can truly make their voices heard. And otherwise, we only have the 1% of the population that runs newspapers and media and funds political campaigns. And I don't think that can be considered really true democracy. So thank you so much. I hope this can be taken into account.
Great point. Thank you. Please.
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Tamarin. This is for the guns side. Thank you very much for all of your commentary. I just had a couple things, some of which has already been mentioned. But your example, when you spoke about the Cold War and how Russia was deterred from acting, I think we do once again have to ask, what about Africa? Africa was used as a second chessboard to, well, obviously there were autonomous African actors in that space, but it was used as a space for competing powers to act out their frustrations when they could not get involved in Europe. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other was, once again, as someone mentioned, there has been no mention of those who are not protected. It's very European, US-centric in a lot of this argument. And lastly, I think we should acknowledge that a lot of this security GDP, 5%, is going towards keeping people out of Europe. People who are trying to access Europe, asylum seekers, refugees, cannot access legally Europe, and so they have to seek alternative means, and a lot of the security is being put into Frontex. A lot of that funding is going towards Frontex to harm people, to arrest them, to violate their rights, international human rights. And so I wouldn't necessarily say all of that is going towards defense. I would say it's going towards offense to keep people out. And also it's also going towards meddling in other people's wars to perpetuate their own motives. So that's
Thank you.
what I say. Thank you.
Actually, some good arguments there for the Butter team too, so very good. Thank you very much. Please.
Okay, so this kind of builds on a few things already said. But Ms. Ramos talked about the Cold War and about the fear of that button being pushed. However, I think the gun side could argue that this is obviously deterrence, but also a lack of equality in military strength, right? The way that a lot of Global South countries have kind of proven their mettle on the global stage, Vietnam in their defeat of Western powers, China's rising military capability, military strength gains respect. And another thing against development, which they could have said, was that development itself is dependent even more on power structures and hierarchies. And I'm an international development student, and I believe that development is inherently neocolonial, right? You look at the way that refugees and asylum seekers from Ukraine are being treated compared to the ones from Afghanistan, from Iran, from other places around the world, and you clearly see that there's neocolonial tendencies, racism embedded in the structures of development. And in that sense, guns actually create more equality than development does. So on the broader scheme of things, if you want to fix social issues, guns seem to be potentially a better way of doing it, historically speaking.
Thank you. Round of applause. I'm watching the clock here, so please try and make you're going to go first? Yep. You make your points as pithy as possible. Thank you.
So Julia Kobik, International Security. I have a financial and economic criticism for the guns team. I'd like to bring up a figure that was mentioned in the previous conference, which is that for every $1 spent on development, $103 of military spending can be avoided, and that is a figure from the International Monetary Fund. So with that in mind, how can you defend defense spending when it is simply, well, seems to be less efficient? Thank you.
Thank you. That was for the butter team, I think. Yes, please.
Yeah, hello, thank you. My name is Daniela Pineker. I'm from Leiden University. Actually, I'm not studying here, so I came from the Netherlands. And my question would be directed to Alberto Alemanno. You were making two points, one on the budget and mentioning Finland spending money into defense, but also social spending. But I can also see in many European countries, for example, coming from the Netherlands, there's been budget cuts on universities, on education, and this money is mostly by right-wing or centrist governments it's not like in the example that you have mentioned in Finland, that they spend money on defense and also spend it on the welfare state, but it is taken out of welfare and put into defense. And I can also see the same in Germany, the country that I'm originally from. And yeah, maybe you can say something about that. And another thing that you have said, you have talked about international law and that we need guns to enforce it. Now, when we look at Donald Trump, someone who's the leader of the US right now, and yeah, a person that definitely does not care about international law and has proven that many times. Well, he has a lot of military power, but like, does one thing that you said, military power and putting more money in defense, go hand in hand with enforcing international law if we give it to the wrong people? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've got may have to run a little bit over because we've got two more here. So, but try and make your points very concise.
Yeah, mine's relatively brief. Hi, my name is Kate Fraser. I'm an international development student here from Minneapolis. And my question is, earlier you guys referred to a lot of current crises today as being both security crises and humanitarian crises. But what do you have to say about situations like Gaza, where in Trump's so-called peace plan, they're being forced to demilitarize? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a point for the guns theme. I understand why you say that in this current day and age, defense spending is often necessary to protect our values and the world order we want. But the world order worth protecting, in my opinion, and I hope also in the opinion of most people in this room, is one which includes the proverbial butcher of development and welfare. So the question is, both practically and principally, how can we ask people to take up guns without offering them something the better to protect? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm astonished at all really, really good points. I hope our debaters have absorbed them, because you now have 3 minutes to confer, and then you've got to decide which one of you is going to come up and give the final rebuttal. You will each have 5 minutes to give your final rebuttal. In the meantime, you're going to now be subject to some New York Times propaganda, a little video. Just to give some context, I think it's a video it's our 175th anniversary this year, and it just gives a little bit of a flavor of that anniversary. So thank you. Back in 3 minutes. Okay, we've come to the moments of the final rebuttals. Both our teams have heard you, have conferred, and now, who's going to be there? You have to decide now. Quick. So who is it? Please go to the podium. We're going to start, though, with butter this time, just to change things up a bit. So we've got 5 minutes each. The clock is there for butter, and the floor is yours.
I love your comments because they make us realize that we need to bring more elements to this very interesting debate. We have been hearing that we need arms to protect democracy, to defend ourselves, to fight the bad guys, etc., etc., etc. I just want to ask my wonderful colleagues, what do you do when arms are flowing with dictators in Africa? What happens with guns that goes in the hands of drug cartels in Mexico? What happens with democracy? You talk about democracy. And you think about that investing in guns is because people are really thinking about security and how to really bring people together. And no, they're very powerful lobbyists in the democracies in which we live that are really putting the emphasis in trying to bring more guns to the table. And as I said, guns are made to be used. And then we fall into the self-fulfilling prophecy in which we don't invest in what is important to bring education, to bring health, and to bring what I have mentioned, and then we bring guns to all these situations. Who sold the guns to Israel? Who sold the guns to all the Africans that have been suffering from dictatorship? Or in my own continent, in Latin America? Who is trading with these issues? And therefore, yes, I will say, stop putting this as the only way to protect our societies. And let's just bring the final thought here, because this is not a discussion in the vacuum. It's a discussion with the powers that be have already decided they want more guns. And they have failed the development agenda. And for the very first time in so many years, we saw child mortality increased in Africa. So put these faces in your map. It's not about something that is abstract. It's not about the discussions that happen at the closed door in a parliament. It's about the people that we are failing. It's about the UN system. I'm very proud to have spent all of my life as Arantxa and here, my dear Kate, in the UN. When you see that the World Health Organization that has provided so much security that helped us navigate the COVID with creating the vaccines is just being put in this very problematic situation, and the same for UNESCO and UNTA and UNPA. Let's just bring this conversation into a much more substantive one and avoid this caricaturization that security can only be enforced with military. Because security, as I said, is well placed when we invest in people and when we invest in their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Guns, the floor.
Dear Gabriela, dear opponents, I would love to believe that education and human development may defend our people when they are threatened right now, when there are drones on our airspace, when there are already hundreds of thousands of people being killed. In that moment, your assessment changes. You're not going to be biased against the possible use of guns. You simply cannot afford the moral possibility of saying we're not going to be using guns. You need guns there, and careful. Here there's a big misunderstanding. Don't be mistaken. We're not here to say that we need guns to use the guns, but we need to use the guns when there will be time to use the guns. So in other words, the default is to have the guns there, but not to be used. Because the only fact of having them give you power, give you projection that prevents the enemy from attacking you. What if Ukraine would have not given up on the nuclear a few years ago? What do you think about the counterfactual? How different would be this scenario? Being weakened and looking weak can make you weaker and create the condition, which is almost a provocation, that since we are becoming so weak, we are alone, unable to protect ourselves. Think about what happened in the last few days. The symbolic sending of a few troops, everybody derided the Europeans, to Greenland, was enough, in essence, to create a different calculus for the US administration and to say, oh, perhaps if we go there, it's going to be too far. And that alone was incredibly powerful as an illustration, as an example. Each country in the world has a duty to protect its own people. And the only way it can do this is to show to be prepared if something bad happens. And we just show you that something bad can happen more often than in the past. This is true for any region of the world. It is true even more for regions of the world, being in Africa, being in Latin America, where this calculus between guns and battery become even more important. And finding the right balance between the two is so essential because, of course, each country has to do both. I'm fully aware that some countries are today making these trade-offs, and they are very tempted to move away some resources from social welfare to the guns. They haven't adjusted because, as we have heard from Oana, for too long in many countries, we could rely on these security guarantees coming from outside. It's no longer the case. This calculus has to be remade. And I think many countries around the world can actually get it right. They can learn from not making such a mistake in this particular moment. I'm going to conclude by saying that you might have realized I hate guns. I do. I didn't do my military service. I was a conscientious objector. I actually had to spend 18 months as opposed to 10 months doing my service a few years ago. I'm as old as at the time there was conscription. So I come from that background. But rationally, I really think that in these new circumstances, we need to question ourselves. We cannot be naive. We cannot afford it. And this is a responsibility. You're going to be leaders. You're going to be taking decisions to protect not yourself, but other people. And to do that calculus, you need to be much more self-aware and to be ready to give up your idealistic instinct and saying, only batter, no guns. The guns are a prerequisite. I'm sorry to say so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I think these are two really good teams, so congratulations and thank you again. Please give them a round of applause again. It's actually such a compelling subject. I want you, though, to remember, before you vote, and I'm going to give it like a 20-second pause, remember, suspend your biases, think about the arguments that have just been given, and reflect on them before you vote. Because I think instinct for many of you is to go one way, understand that, but the point of this is to do deep listening and not perhaps feel that you feel one way or the other, but based on what you've heard, the arguments of what you've heard, then please make your vote. So I'm going to give just 15, 20 seconds for you just to reflect on that, and then I'm going to ask you to vote. And voting, please remember, is noise. Noise. It's the New York Times clapometer, our new anti-AI system. Okay. So, for those in the House that believe that security should come before human development, please clap now. Pause for effect. For those in the House that believe that human development should come before security, please clap now. Human development has it. Thank you. And thank you for your engagement. Thank you, our debaters. Thank you, Sciences Po. And the one thing I would say, again, a little bit of New York Times propaganda, you all have access, I don't know whether you all know it, but you have access to the New York Times every day, our digital subscription. So if you aren't accessing the New York Times, please talk to Mark and he will help you do so. Thank you very much.
So just before you all leave, our dean had to go off to a dinner engagement tonight, and she'll probably tell you a little bit about it tomorrow because it's going to be a very interesting one. So it comes to me just to say this is the end of day one of this part of the Youth and Leader Summit, but some of you have been allocated and applied to be part of a breakout session with indeed the speakers who are here on stage and Stephen as well. So those will take place in a moment. But just to remind that there is a day two tomorrow, same time, same place, 5:30 p.m. in this amphitheater Boutimi. And as the dean said at the beginning of the day, the first session is going to be a short discussion about the AI and whether it's for the good or for the bad. And then, of course, there's the panel, which is the theme of this year's Youth and Leaders Summit, Wanted a UN Secretary for a Broken World. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And just one more round for this fantastic panel. Thank you so much for the New York Times debate.